Good evening, and it's great to be with you. My name is Doug Hartman. I'm a professor at Michigan State University, and it's my good fortune to spend a little bit of time with you to talk about some things that will be helpful in developing a competitive graduate application for study in the US. I've been a professor for a number of years, and what I'll be saying today really draws on that experience. But I know that you're drawn to this webinar today from many locations in Kazakhstan, as you can see here on the map. And while I know you're in different locations, you share a common focus, and that is how can I develop a graduate application that'll be very competitive and that will help me pursue my dreams and my goals. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. To give you some idea of where I'm located, looking at a map of the US here on the screen, you'll see Michigan highlighted in green, and then the little helmet or the head-shaped figure there is where I am right now in East Lansing, Michigan. The experience that I'll bring and talk about today, that I'll talk from, began about 3 decades ago. And I've been reviewing graduate applications for over 30 years as a faculty member. And I've read probably 1,000 or so applications. So I'm going to talk from that experience, things that I've seen that worked well and haven't worked well in making a competitive application. I've also been mentoring graduate students over those years. And I'll draw on that experience also. For about the last 20 years, I've been talking to prospective graduate students like you about how to develop a competitive application. And I've done this at 3 different universities in the US. So each of those universities has given me a slightly different perspective on thinking about how do you put together a competitive application. And these are the 3 universities where I've been a faculty member in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and now Michigan. And then I've also had the good fortune to be a visiting professor at a couple of universities, at UC Berkeley in California and New York City at Columbia University and their Teachers College. So across these different institutions, it's been really helpful to see the many different sides of how the application process works in the US. I've also thought about applying to college in a very personal way. My wife and I have 3 children. Our oldest, our son, is a senior at the University of Michigan, and he's pictured on the screen here. He's an economics major, and you can see he's also an athlete. He's on the track team at the university. Our daughter is a little younger. She's in college also. And she is a sports communications major in the Chicago area. And she goes to Northwestern University. And then our youngest child is in high school. She's in grade 11, and she's thinking about college now. She's begun to fill out applications. So my wife and I've had many discussions over the years talking about the process from the role of a parent and what can we do to help be supportive of our kids putting together competitive applications. My wife's also been a professor, and so she has thought about a lot of issues around applications as well. And together we have thought about our own experiences applying to undergrad, master's, and then doctoral programs. So both professionally and personally, I'm going to bring some experiences to what I'll share with you today. Just to give you an idea of the context, the big picture context of graduate school in the US, we have over 1,000 universities that offer the PhD degrees. And if you're interested in a master's, we have even more, probably between 2,000 and 3,000 universities offer master's degrees. So that there's plenty of choice in thinking about possible universities. And of course, the challenge is figuring out the universities, the 1 or 2 or 3 that are just right for you. The admissions process for graduate school is unique for each university and each department. There's no one process for all universities in the US. And what this means is that you have to really study each university, look at their website, learn what you can about the process of applying to that university, because it may differ for a different university. The requirements also differ for each university. So one university will want the GRE or the GMAT or some other test. Another university won't want it. And so you have to check out all the requirements. And especially during this pandemic moment, you want to pay attention to the requirements, because some places are waiving certain requirements or they're relaxing them. So you want to make sure you're up to date on what those requirements are. And then the final thing about the admissions process at the graduate level is that decisions are made by professors. We decide who gets admitted into the program. And this is different than the undergrad level. Often for undergraduates, there's a special staff, an admissions staff that makes decisions about who gets admitted. But when you move on to the higher levels of graduate school, professors are making the decisions. And so we are your audience. When you fill out your application, you want to imagine a professor is reading this. Keep them in mind. You're writing for those people. So that's the context. I do want to say a little bit here at the beginning about funding for graduate school, because this is the question that comes up inevitably in conversations. I remember about a year ago, I was at a recruitment fair in Nur-Sultan, beautiful city, by the way. Just spent a memorable time there and had a chance to meet Rashawn and some others at Education USA. And when I was at a table and would meet people and talk a little bit about coming to study in the US, funding came up. And so I want to share a few thoughts about this. And what I realized is that there's sort of a misconception about how funding works in the US context. So I want to explain what the misconception is and then provide a correction to it. And so to explain this, I want to use a diagram. And the diagram lays out what I think many people think about funding college education at the graduate level. And that is they first ask the question, what is it going to cost me to study at your university? What's the price? And then based on what they see the price being, then they begin to say, okay, what universities do I like? So they've kind of narrowed universities down by price. And then once they get it down to a smaller number, then they say, okay, which one do I really want to go to? What's a good fit for me? And the result of doing this way, of approaching it this way, is that the price really is the factor in which they're narrowing the universities down. And I think there's a better criteria for narrowing than price. And this will become clearer in a moment. So I think a different model, a correcting model, is better. So here's the way I think you should approach thinking about funding graduate school in the US. And rather than start with price, start with a self-assessment. And what I mean by this is really just asking yourself the questions like, why do I want this degree? What are my goals? What do I want to do with the degree? And what skills am I trying to develop? And this assessment, this kind of reflection on who I am and what I would like to do and what my dream is, should be the first thing thought about. Once this is fairly clear, then begin to think about what programs, what graduate programs and schools in the US are a good fit. Which ones match up well with what I'd like to do? And then finally, think about price. So I think the corrective way to think about this is to put price as one of the last things to think about. And the reason I say that is that many graduate programs have funding possibilities, funding opportunities, if you're accepted into the program. So the key thing is to first think about, am I applying to the right place given my goals? And if a program thinks you're a good fit and they accept you, then you can start talking about financial aid and how you're going to pay for all this. The financial aid is not really knowable. It's not something you can know until you're admitted into a program. So you want to do what you can up front to find a good place, good fit, apply. And if you get in, then we start talking about dollars or tenge. So this is, I think, the best way to approach thinking about funding. There are a couple of other things too. These are just big picture ideas. You can think about funding in several different ways. There are different types of funding. One is you could work while in graduate school. And I'm going to mention some different kinds of work here. One is there are teaching assistantships. You're probably familiar with these. These are graduate students who help out with teaching of courses for undergraduates. And in the field I'm in, we need a lot of help. We teach a lot of courses, and so I work with graduate students, and sometimes they're helping me teach the course, and sometimes they learn the course well enough that they teach it on their own, and I just help them out a little bit here and there. There are also research assistantships, and these are really graduate students helping out on research projects. And you're paid for this. You get free tuition, you get health insurance for these assistantships. You don't get rich, but it helps pay for school. And so you would help a professor or maybe a research team carry out a project. And the third kind of assistantship that's related to work is administrative. And this is where a graduate student helps run a program, a degree program, a certification program. And you might do things like help maintain a website, help with some of the administrative and paperwork tasks that are part of an office. And so I have graduate students I work with who are teaching, research, and administrative all the time. And they come here from the US and from other places in the world, and they get the benefit of being an assistant, kind of learning the work of the university. And it's a terrific way. The important thing here is you don't know whether you can get an assistantship until you're accepted into a program. And so that's why picking the right fit up front is so important, so that you have a higher chance of getting accepted. Another kind of funding that I think we all hope for are different kinds of awards. These are things like fellowships, scholarships, and grants. And these are really, you can think of them as free money. It's money you don't have to pay back. And sometimes universities offer fellowships, scholarships, and grants. Sometimes countries do this. I know in Kazakhstan, you have the Bolashok scholarships. And we have some Bolashok scholars here at Michigan State, terrific graduate students. So you have to do your homework here and find out what's available. Again, most university fellowships, scholarships, and grants you can't apply for, and you won't know about until you're accepted into a graduate program. So each year I sit on a committee and we look at the students who are admitted, and we see who has need, who has achieved well, and then we assign different fellowships, scholarships, and grants to those students, but only after they've been admitted into graduate school. There are also loans that are available for funding. And I won't say a lot about this because I'm not a financial aid expert, But if you check with each university, um, somewhere they have information about loans for international study. And this just happens to be a screenshot of a page from Stanford University. And down in the very bottom paragraph here, it's highlighted. You'll see that they give a little bit of information about if you're interested in borrowing money that you have to pay back. Here's a little information. And I'll share these slides with Rashawn, and she can share them with you so you can have this information. Also, this is something that I highly recommend for everybody. And when you're thinking about funding for graduate school, you want to spend time searching and learning online, because you want to come into this with sort of the full picture in mind of how funding works. And in a webinar like this, I can just share a few ideas, but really the responsibility is for you to become a serious student of how funding works for graduate school in the US if you'd like to come here. And the best advice I can give is to go to a specific university's website. So this is the one for the university where I work at. And you want to type in their search box there. You'll see there in red the letters funding graduate school. You want to know how at this particular university, how do they support students to fund graduate school? And when you do this, almost all the sites will pull up a page that has detailed information on here at our university. Here's how we fund and support graduate students, what's available. And so this is the best way, I think, to get accurate information. If you go to a search engine like Google and you type in funding graduate school, you'll pull up all kinds of stuff, and some of it's okay and some of it's not. And so what you want is a filter. You want somebody who's taken the time to really pull together the best information on funding graduate school. And the people who've done that are the people in the admissions offices at the universities in the US. And so that's why I go to Michigan State's website, or go to Harvard's website, type in funding graduate school. And what's interesting on this page is that this is, if you see the heading that says funding and aid, I'll turn on my little marker here, funding and aid. The second sentence says, under that says, our financial aid program features guaranteed funding for the first 5 years to all PhD students. So if you're accepted to the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Harvard, they will fund you. They will pay for your education for the first 5 years. That's pretty generous. And other universities do this too. Not all of them, but this is where you have to go to each site, each university's website, and find out. And if you're thinking of a master's degree, notice down below here, they have a little space that says funding for master's degrees. So there are different levels or different types of resources available, whether your interest is in a PhD or in a master's. Here's another one for Berkeley out in California, University of California at Berkeley. And notice they spell out right here the types of funding that they'll help provide, and they spell them out here in some bullet points. And these differ a little bit than Harvard's or Michigan State's, so you want to take the time to study each university. And then down below, they have given you some quality resources you can look at. They've done their homework and said, if you want to know more, here are places to go. And then I think I have, that's my last one, looking at Berkeley. So that's a little bit of information about funding. I hope it'll get you started. And again, I want to go back to the triangle I had at the beginning. The place to start is with the self-assessment. What are my goals? What do I want to do with the degree? And then try and find programs, graduate programs that will help me meet that. Because some programs differ. They all have different curricula, and you want to find the one that's going to be best for you. And then think about cost after you've been admitted. So the first step is to get admitted. And that's what I want to move on to next. What's the process here? And how can you be really competitive in applying so that that financial aid can then be available to you? I think that the best advice on the process of applying is given by Education USA. I think that Rashawn and her colleagues can really mentor you in the 5 steps of study in the US. And you may have seen a little diagram like this one that maps out the 5 steps. Today, I don't have time to talk about all of them, so I'm going to focus on one, the middle one, number 3, about completing the application, what goes into it, how to prepare for completing the application. And I'm going to argue, put forth the argument that this step actually has different phases to it. And I'm going to propose there are 5 phases to applying for a graduate program. And I'm going to talk through each of these. Most people want to jump to the 4th phase, right over here in yellow. They want to start filling out the application right away. And my point is that there needs to be some preparation work starting over on the left with personal, professional, and program work. I've already mentioned some things about these, and I'll go into more detail. And that once you do this work over here, when you sit down to fill out the application, it goes much easier. It's much better. You have a stronger, more competitive application. And then, of course, all this ends with a kind of interview. Increasingly, the application process today involves a Skype or a Zoom interview. So let's go through each of these. I'll start on the left with the personal work and then move to the right, step at a time. So personal work. What you're doing here is you're really asking the question, how do I approach work? You're trying to understand yourself. And this is part of that self-assessment work I talked about earlier. You want to understand when you're asked to do something, what's your approach to it? And I think the best answer to that question when you're thinking about graduate school is you want to see if you're the kind of person who approaches work as a calling. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. One of my colleagues at the University of Michigan has done quite a bit of research on how people approach work. And it turns out that some people approach work as if it's a job, over here on the left. And some approach it as if it's a career, and some as if it's a calling. So if they approach it as a job, they do what they need to do, and they see it as a way to get income. And then whatever they earn, they just use somewhere else. Okay, they're punching the clock. They're working from 8 to 5, and that's it. Those who see it as a career see their work as a way to advance and gain status and get ahead. And those who see it as a calling, they see work as, this is my life mission. This is who I am. This is what I'm supposed to do in life. And it turns out that the people who are the most satisfied and successful in work see work as a calling. And so you want to think about, where am I along this continuum? How do I approach work? Because as you move into graduate school, in my observation, that those who are the most successful see graduate school as a calling, not as a job or a career booster, but as something they're supposed to do in life. This is who I am. This is what I really am meant to do. And not just for graduate school, but beyond graduate school. If you approach it as a calling, you'll be much more satisfied and successful. So, personal work, think about how we approach life, and not only work, but life. There's some really good advice on how we should just approach life in general. And the recommendation I make is to approach it as a designer. And again, I'll say a little bit about what I mean by this. And I'm drawing on a book here that I recommend you take a look at. It's called Designing Your Life. And it's written by a couple of guys at Stanford University. And they were working with students who wanted to go on to graduate school or into a career, and they just weren't sort of figuring out how to do it. And so they wrote this book on how to design forward in your life. And it's got many good activities. I'm going to mention just a couple ideas. That if you approach life as a designer, you have, it means you have a bias for action. And what that simply means is you like to try stuff, new stuff, and test it out. And then you see your life as kind of unfolding and building going forward in a way that you really want to grow. So if you think about graduate school, this is a lot of what graduate school is like. It's about trying new ideas out, trying new stuff out, testing them, studying them, and developing new directions and growing. And so if you're seeing that I approach life as a designer, that's going to fit well with graduate school and beyond graduate school too. Another thing designers do is they engage in what's called odyssey living. And that word odyssey you might be familiar with, Homer's great poetic work called the Odyssey. It means journey living. You're living your life as if it's a great journey. And this involves imagining several or many possible futures. It's being open. Maybe you feel strongly in one direction, but you're not closing off others. You're seeing that, yeah, those could be open to me too. And you're really flexible in the way you're approaching the way the future could unfold. So to answer this first question about personal work, what do I need to do in this kind of self-assessment process? How do I approach work and life is a question to ask yourself. And I ask that myself too, and our kids and our family. And the best response is to approach work as if it's a calling, as if it's your life mission, and as a designer, as if it's an odyssey or a journey. So we've looked at personal work over here on the far left. Let's move on to the next phase, that of professional work. And the question to ask yourself here is, how should I prepare for filling out my graduate school application? Are there some things I should do that would help make me more competitive? And the best way to answer that, I think, is to begin to think and act like a professor right now. Okay? Because professors are going to be reading your application to graduate school, you want to understand how they think and how they act, what they value. Because they're your audience. You're trying to convince them that I'm a good applicant. Consider me for your program. So imagine a group of faculty sitting around a table. They're reading applications. One of the applications is yours. So what are they thinking? What are they looking for? Well, it turns out they're looking for three things. They're looking for your potential for research and potential for teaching and service. So faculty, in a way, have three lenses on. And you want to understand that, and then in your application, show things that you've done that fit in those three directions. So I'm going to give you a few ideas of things you could begin doing today that you can then say in your application in these three areas. So I'll start on the left with research. I hope these are readable for you. I won't read all of these, but I just want to mention a couple, and you can look at the rest later. So one thing you can do is join a professional organization. Whatever field you want to go into, whatever profession or discipline, there is an organization of researchers who meet, they have a journal, they do lots of things together professionally. If you can join as a student at the reduced rate, that's something you can show or say in your application. And what that says to professors sitting around the table is, this person has already taken a first step in moving into the field we work in. And I can tell you as a faculty member who's read a lot of applications, that stands out. That says this person's a little bit more serious than the other applicants. So if you can do something like that, joining a professional organization, even if it's a local organization in your region or country, or international as well, you want to try and do that. And I'll mention the second item here on the list too. You can begin to read in the journals, the academic journals, some of the research. Now, it might be really complicated and beyond where your knowledge is right now. That's okay, but just browse through it. See what kinds of topics and issues and who maybe some of the prominent researchers are. That's information you could then mention in your application, that I've been looking through the journals and noticed something, okay, that's of interest to you. And when I see that in an application, again, that stands out from other applicants that we're reviewing for admission. So those are a couple thoughts under research. You can on your leisure, look at the others. I'm going to go to teaching. The second area in which faculty are looking. Remember, we're looking for people who could help teach courses. We need graduate students who could help out. And so we're looking, you have some teaching experience in your background. And it could be as simple as observing a course or tutoring people, excuse me, and or maybe helping out with a course. And while you're an undergrad, if that's where you are right now, you could begin doing that. Approach a professor and say, I'd like to just help out a little bit, even if it's just handing out papers in class. You want to get some kind of experience that you can then mention in your application. And then the third area is service. And service really involves giving freely of your time, your effort, and your expertise. And you can do that by serving maybe as a student member on a committee, or volunteering for a local conference, or other things. This is really important in the US context. We really value people serving others, giving freely of the benefits they've received to others. And so you want to make sure that you're able to say something about this because you've spent some time serving others in your profession. So there are three areas: research, teaching, and service. And faculty are looking for these kinds of things. We want to see the potential. And if you can show one thing in research, one in teaching, and one in service, that will help advantage you a little bit in the admissions process. You don't have to do everything that's here. That would be really, really difficult. Some people maybe have had opportunities that would allow them to do all these things, but these are just suggestions. Just pick one, in each area, and maybe two if you're in a position that permits that. The key idea here is, before you even fill out the application, you want to begin intentionally creating experiences that you can then mention in your application. And these are not just any experience, they're ones that will be valued by the people reading your application, and that will be professors sitting around a table. So let's go on here. That's professional work. And the question here was to ask, how should I prepare for my graduate application? And the short answer is, right today, you want to start thinking and acting like a professor. And how do you do that? You think in terms of research, teaching, and service. And you say, what can I do in one thing in each of those areas? Let's go to the next phase. We're still preparing here. We haven't actually filled out the application. We're just getting ourselves ready. And this area is called program work. So the question to ask yourself here is, how do I find this graduate program, whether it's a master's or PhD? You know, as I mentioned at the outset, there are over 1,000 PhD programs and several thousand master's programs in the US. How do I find it? Well, the short answer is you have to do research to find a good fit. And the key word here is that last word in the sentence, fit. It's a short word, only 3 letters, but it's a word of great importance. So by the word fit, I mean you're trying to find a good match, something that's really suitable or compatible to you and your goals. I like to think, at least in the field I'm in, that fit means is the program I want to go into, is it kind of like a family I would like to join? Would I feel comfortable there? And would I be welcomed? And are there things I could contribute and also receive while in that program? That's all about what fit is. And while a university may have a very prestigious name and reputation, you want to find out what I fit, you know, because you don't want to go to a place that maybe, you know, sounds wonderful, but it may not be the best fit for what you want to do. So how do you do this? How do you find a good fit? Well, I suggest that you start by using the rankings, the university rankings, and notice the last word here, judiciously. And that just means you have to use them cautiously and in a limited way. And I have a suggestion for how to do this, and I want to show you. So this is one of the rankings that are used by many people. It's called the US News and World Report rankings of the best graduate schools. And many students in the US use this to help find good fit universities. There are problems with using rankings, and so that's why I say you need to be careful and judicious. And I think if you approach it the way I'm going to suggest, you'll be judicious in doing it. So here's how you do it. When you go into this website, it's free. Let's say you're going to go into an area in engineering. And on the left, you'll see the rankings. And I've only shown you the top 3 here. But you'll notice that the best engineering schools as of the last ranking, this is 2019. I don't think the 2020 rankings are out yet. You'll see there MIT is number 1, then Stanford, and then Berkeley. And all really great engineering programs. You know, and the list continues on down. There are 219 engineering schools. So, but if you're interested in a specific area of engineering, you don't know from this list if, you know, is Stanford a good fit for the particular area you're interested in engineering. And to find out, you need to go over to this little area on the left. It says all specialties. And if you click on that little triangle there, you'll get a drop-down menu, and it'll allow you to pick specialty areas within engineering. And this is how you can be judicious, okay? Is to pick the sub area within engineering. And what you'll see is another different listing of engineering programs. The one on the left is a general ranking. The one on the right is a very specific ranking, and it's just this is just industrial engineering. And the thing to notice here, this is really interesting, that the top 3 schools on the right are completely different than the overall rankings on the left. You have Georgia Tech, Michigan, and Northwestern. So if you're interested in industrial engineering, these are potentially a better fit for you than MIT, Stanford, and Berkeley. And so that's why using a tool like this carefully will help you begin the process of finding a good fit. One more example. This is in the social sciences. And on the left, you'll see Harvard, Pennsylvania, and Stanford are the top three general ranked, top ranked generally in education. And if we use the specialty feature over on the left, let's say I'm interested particularly in educational research in, let's say, middle and high schools. What we'll see on the left is that 3 different universities in that specialty area are the top 3. And of course, the ranking continues down. There are other schools too. But again, notice the top 3 schools in this specialty area, MSU, Columbia, and Michigan, are completely different than those in the general rankings. So if we're trying to find the best fit for you, we want to use these specialty areas as a starting point. Once you've kind of found out what are good areas in your specialty area, then you want to start developing a list, a kind of brainstorm list of programs that you think are good fit universities. And it might be a short list of 3 or 4, or it could be longer. When my own story is I applied to 6 graduate schools, and I was just like, oh man, I prayed if I could just get into one, I would be satisfied. I thought they were all good fit. I applied to Harvard, Stanford, UCLA, Minnesota, Illinois, and there's one more, USC. And I was just hoping I could get into one. And it turned out I got accepted to all 6. And so now I had a problem. How do I decide now? I thought they were all good fit, and maybe one of them would work out, and it turns out they all worked out. So what I had to do is dig a little deeper, do more detective work to find out of those 6, which were even a better fit than I first thought. And you'll want to do these kinds of things too. And thanks to the internet these days, it's much easier to do this kind of investigative work. First thing you want to do is talk with current and former graduate students in some of the programs you think might be a good fit. You can, oftentimes our secretaries in our offices will get an email or a phone call and say, hey, I'd like to talk to some of your current students. Could you share my email with them or my phone number? And we have students all the time who are great in sharing information to prospective students in graduate school, and they just have a brief conversation, tell them what it's like. And this is often the best way to get a real picture of what a doctoral or a master's program is like, is to talk to current students or even former students. Another thing to do is to begin following faculty and graduate students on social media. You can see what kinds of things they're thinking about, what they're doing, what their lives are like in this university context. If you can, reach out through email to a faculty member and say, hey, I've read I saw some of your research in a journal. Looks really interesting. Could I talk to you for 15 minutes just to see what your program is like? You could also read some of the research of the faculty in the program, and you really want to study their website and their biographies. Overall, what you're trying to do here is you're doing detective work to find out about the culture of the graduate program. And you're trying to figure out, is this a place I can see myself? What I feel welcome, what I feel like family here in this program. There are also things to pay attention to while you're doing this detective work. You want to first find out, do the faculty publish with graduate students? Because that's part of graduate school, is you're trying to learn how to do research. And if faculty are publishing, that means they're working closely with graduate students on research. You also want to see, do they present at conferences with students? Because the presentation of work Academic work is a really key skill, and you want somebody who will do that with you and help you and mentor you into it. You want to know, are there seminars that are regularly offered or special? You know, are people from around the world coming through and sharing their ideas? Because that makes a program really alive and vital, and you want to find out if that's happening. Do they publish with former students? Where are their graduates today? I want to find out what kind of jobs they get. It's also interesting to note and important. And as I mentioned at the very outset, you want to know what kind of assistantships are available. Know that, again, you can't be given or assigned an assistantship until you've been accepted to a program, but you can ask what types are available. You know, some programs only have teaching assistantships, and others have only research, and some have a mix. So that's okay, a question that's okay to ask. So that's I'm kind of talking through this quickly, but what you're seeing here under personal, professional, and program work are sets of experiences that you want to build and develop so that when you sit down to do the application work over here, you have a lot to say. You have great things to say. So let's get to that, the application. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple slides here. So let's say now you're prepared. You've done some of the things that I've suggested, and you sit down. You're either going to fill out online or on paper the application. How should you prepare the application? What's going to make it most competitive? Well, the short answer is you want to prepare it like you're a marketer or a salesperson. You're trying to, sort of, in a sense, you're trying to sell your potential to the professors sitting around the table reading applications. You're trying to convince them. You need to persuade. And the way you do that is you show you've had similar kinds of experiences that suggest you're a good bet. You're a good candidate for the way this program prepares people. And the best evidence is things you've done related to research, teaching, and service, the three areas I talked about earlier. The application usually involves many of these types of items. I'm not going to have time to talk about all these today. I have another webinar that I do sometimes that picks out each of these or most of these and talks about them in more detail. Today, I'm just going to mention a couple things about two of them. I'm going to skip through these right here. The first one I'm going to talk about is the personal statement. And when you're asked to write this statement, this is a place where you can showcase what you've been doing already that's related to going into this field that you want to go into. That's why it's important you do that preparation work, where you assess, like, who am I, what am I about, what are my goals, what can I do in research, teaching, and service. You also want to explain how this work has now prepared you to take this next step into graduate study. A story I see sometimes is people have said, I've done research as an undergraduate in this area, and it really created a curiosity in me. And I kept wanting to know more. And I did a second research experience, or maybe an internship. And now I've decided that this is really what I'm committed to. And so graduate school is the next step for me. And your program is ideal. It's a perfect fit because I've talked to some of your students and some of your faculty. And that's the kind of argument or explanation you want to provide in your application. You also want to mention a faculty member or two that could be an advisor. If you've studied the website, you see the different research areas faculty focus on, you want to mention that. There's one exception. You'll see on some websites, they say don't contact professors, and you want to honor that. But increasingly, my experience is that faculty, when they sit down around a table and read applications, they want to know, has this person done their homework? Have they reached out to a faculty member and tried to make contact with them and have a conversation? So that's application, or the personal statement. A few words about number 4 here on the screen, the reference letters. I've read many of these, and just a few tips. For graduate school, you want these letters written by academic mentors. Because we're looking at your potential for serious academic work, we'd like to have people who are doing academic work say some things about you. Family members, sort of other people that can't speak to your academic potential should not be writing these letters. You want them in the letter to focus on your academic abilities and potential. So if you can share that with them, say, here's what they really want you to focus on. And then each letter needs to be tailored or written specifically for each graduate program. I've seen very general or generic letters written, and they're often not looked at favorably. They're writing sort of to any university, but a letter that's written just for our program, for our university, faculty look at more closely and with great care. And you want them to explain why you're suitable for admission to this program. So you might have to give them a little information about the program. So those are just a few words about the actual application. And I want to point out, notice I've spent most of my time paying attention to this area here, the personal, professional, and program work. Because if you've done your homework here, these 3 areas, when you get to the 4th phase in application work, it's easier to do. You got a lot to say. You got good things to say. So I'm going to go to the 5th area here, the interview. And increasingly, universities are asking for an interview. If you receive an email or a text and it says, we'd love to interview you, get excited, because that means they're thinking about you seriously as a potential candidate. And you want to prepare for this. If you schedule it, you want to make sure that you spent time, just as much time and just as much care in preparing as you did for the other parts of your application work. So what can you do? Well, you can prepare by seeing this as a conversation. It's not going to be an interrogation. It's not going to be a situation where you're just drilled with questions and you have to come up with great answers. It's going to be more conversational. I just want to sort of hear you, see you, get to know a little bit more about some of the things you said in your application. So this takes some of the pressure off. It's not like you're performing in a really tough situation. It's more of like you might sit and have coffee or tea at a coffee shop with someone, only it'll be online. The way you can prepare is to anticipate questions you could be asked. So you want to look through your application materials and say, what could they ask me more about? They might want more detail about some research you did earlier, or maybe when you helped teach something, or a service project you were involved in. So be prepared to say a bit more about some of the things that were in your application. You also want to prepare some questions you have. There could be some things that are still uncertain in your mind. And so just have those written down so you can refer to them sometime during the conversation. You really want to study the website about the program or graduate program. I've been on a couple interviews where it was clear somebody really didn't know anything about our program and the interview didn't go well. But you just want to know the general structure, what are the requirements, and so on. And then you want to practice and rehearse. It's best just to get alone and just talk out loud. Say, if they ask me this, what would I say? And then you say it, and then you say, oh, I could say it a little bit better. And you just casually rehearsing. And you want to ultimately do it so it feels very natural. And as I mentioned a moment ago, you want to put as much work into the interview preparation as you did for your materials that you submitted in the application. Okay. It often doesn't go well if somebody just shows up for the interview unprepared. You want to get ready for it. So how should you approach the application interview? You want to approach it like it's a conversation, but it's a conversation you've prepared for. So just a few final thoughts here, and we'll open it up for questions. You want to really, I think, take this broad view of the application process. And by broad, I mean you want to see it as having 5 phases, like those on the screen. Many people just want to sit down and fill out the application. I'm suggesting you really want to prepare doing some things that will make the application work better. Ideally, you want to begin about a year before the application deadline. I know that sounds like a long time, but to do this preparation work here, the first 3 phases, takes time. And the time you put into it will pay off in making your application more competitive. Another bit of advice is, as I mentioned, just starting it early. And the final is you really want to invest in this. If this is your calling, if this is your mission in life, you want to really connect with people that you can work with at Education USA. Rashawn and her colleagues, they are up on things. They will be there to support. And if they see that you're really committed to this, okay, and you really want to, put in the time and the effort on this and follow up on it, it'll pay off for you. You'll have a more competitive application. So I'm going to stop right there and open it up for questions. Thank you for your patience and attention. Appreciate being able to share some of this information with you.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. Can I ask a question?
Please go ahead.
So this year, many universities canceled the GRE test as a part of their application, and they wrote that GRE scores are recommended but not required. So shall we still send our scores? I mean, will it be a benefit?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the university. Some universities will certainly make use of the scores if you send them. It may be helpful to them. My recommendation would be if you have the scores already and they are scores that fall within the range that students who are admitted typically fall within, then I would share the scores with them. Just another piece of information. If you haven't taken the standardized tests, I wouldn't worry about it. This is an unusual time, and they'll understand if the scores aren't there. If you did take the tests and your scores are on the lower side, maybe you had a bad day, or maybe you're not a strong test taker, I wouldn't submit them. They're gonna make their decisions based on the other information that you provide. And if you provide a strong argument, a strong case for why you should be admitted, and your test scores aren't there, I think they'll still look at your application favorably. Just know that it's always competitive. There are many talented people applying for a limited number of graduate openings. And so you want to do whatever will present yourself in the best light, the best fit for their program.
Thank you.
I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
There are some questions in the chat. So one is Good. A lot of admitted students defer to spring or even next fall. How will it affect fall 2001 applicants? Availability of slots, overall funding, etc. And questions about Michigan State. How diverse is your department? And how is public transportation there? Is a personal car needed?
Okay. For the first question was about deferring admission. I think it's fine to defer. Universities are figuring this out week by week. And if you have been admitted and choose to defer, more than likely the program or department is going to keep that place open for you. The key thing here is you want to keep in active communication with them, whoever the contact person is that you've been working with, so that you're staying in their mind. I don't think they're going to change their mind, but you just want to, not only for your own purposes, but just to keep them aware that you're eager, you're ready, you're just delaying it for a little bit. So that's how I would approach it.
But how about those students who will apply next year? Because there will be some like deferred students, will it kind of decrease number of new students?
I think it will in some cases, yes. Where I can think of the program that I'm involved in. We will be admitting. We typically admit about 15 graduate students a year, and we'll admit fewer next year because we have some people who are deferring. Our anticipation is that that'll only happen for 1 year. If there's a vaccine and the pandemic, mostly goes away, we'll get back to a more normal routine around 15. So I don't think this will be a permanent situation, but just maybe for a year or two at the most, hopefully. There was also a question about transportation.
Transportation and diversity of your department at Michigan State.
Sure. So at Michigan State, we have students from all over the world. We have about 7,000 students who are from outside of the US. We have about a little over 50,000 students on campus. So we're one of the larger universities in the country, probably among the top 10. And we have lots of international students. And we have an international office that handles all the visas and everything that needs to be taken care of in terms of paperwork. So we're a very diverse campus. We're also near another university, the University of Michigan, and it's also a very large and diverse university. So we're situated in an hour from each other, a place where there are lots of other universities. And Western Michigan, we have 2 people on the webinar today who I think they're from Kazakhstan, who are at Western Michigan University. That's a slightly less diverse context, but they have easy access to other parts of the state where there's a more diverse student body. In terms of transportation, a car is nice, but we have buses that students can ride around campus or into the community. Bicycles and mopeds are really big. Students have those to ride around. So there are ways to get around, and depending on what your university, where it's located, that'll also influence transportation for you. We're more of a smaller city, rural setting, but if you're in Chicago, there are multiple ways: Uber, other forms of transportation. Rashawn, is there another question that popped up there?
There are actually lots of questions. Will COVID affect funding opportunities for students like teaching assistantships, other assistantships, and like fellowships?
It's likely to have some effect. It really depends on the financial condition of the program and the university. I would say that most of the research universities in the US, that would be kind of the top 60 universities, will take a little bit of a cut. So they might lose a few positions for assistantships, but for 1 year, they'll be able to pretty much maintain what we had before. But if this extends out longer than another year, we'll see more cuts in assistantship positions. In terms of scholarships and grants and fellowships, at the moment, those seem to be staying in place. If you're able to earn or receive one of those, so those could continue.
Is it possible to receive good funding like scholarship, fellowship, or assistantship for PhD if the GPA requirement is not met, but the research paper is published?
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so it's probably possible. You know, again, it's going to vary from one university to another, and even within a university, different graduate programs will approach this differently. I'll tell you my perspective on this is if you have published a research paper, that's going to stand out in an application for a PhD. Most people who are coming into a PhD program have not published academic research. And if you have, and if you're able to showcase that and it's good work, that'll stand out. What you want to do then is explain why the GPA is not at the standard that the program typically wants. You know, it may be that something happened. Maybe there was a life experience or a family tragedy that caused the grades to drop for a period of time. And in your application, you want to just simply explain that. You don't have to do it in a lengthy way, but if you can help us see why those grades took a dip and went down for a while, a committee could look at that and say, you know, we understand that happens, you know, life happens, and they might be considerate of that. So it's worth trying and doing that. But I think the fact that you've published something would really stand out. I know that the colleagues I work with, we really take note of that. And we know that not everybody can be in that position. We're not looking for that as a requirement, but if it happens, that's great to your advantage.
That's good. Another question. In the professional work section, you mentioned shadowing a professor. Can you explain what it means and maybe give some examples so people will understand? Sure.
So there are different examples of it. If you were to shadow a teacher for teaching or a professor for teaching, what it would mean is that you would go to all the classes they teach during a semester and be like their shadow. You would follow them. You might help out a little bit in some ways. And your main goal is to observe how they teach the course, how they handle things, how they communicate the content and develop the skills. And the idea is, at least for graduate school, that at some point you might teach that course yourself, maybe the next semester or two later. That's how shadowing works once you're in graduate school. If you were to do this before graduate school as an experience, you would just follow the professor around and see, you know, how do they prepare, how do they advise students, what do they do during office hours, just to get a picture in your mind of what's all involved in teaching a course. They might even invite you to help out with the evaluation of some tests or assignments, so you get a little feel of it. So that's shadowing for teaching. You could also shadow for research. That might be sitting in on some research meetings seeing how they construct a survey or other kinds of data measurement instruments. You may not actually be doing any of the work, but you're just seeing how it's done. So those are two examples of what could be done in that professional work section. Good question.
The student has a master's degree from the American University, and she wants to apply for another master's in the United States. Would it be disadvantage when applying?
Well, having it a master's, I don't think is a disadvantage. What you've done is you've demonstrated that you already have the skill set to do academic work. That you can do the reading, you can do the viewing, you can do the analytic thinking, you can evaluate information, you probably have some beginning research skills. And so I don't see any of those as a disadvantage. You've also, because you've done it in the US, you have a command of the language. You understand to a degree how US universities function, at least one of them, and that you're likely to be somebody who's going to be successful again in another's master's degree program. So I don't really see it as a disadvantage. When I read master's applications and somebody has a master's already, I'm like, okay, this is somebody who could probably do well. My main concern would be, is there a good fit? Is what the person wants the second master's for something that we can deliver as a program? Will we help them achieve the goal they have? And so that's the thing I would focus on, is making sure that the program fits what you really want to do with the master's. I hope that helps.
I hope. This is a great question. So Kirill is asking, what are the key aspects the committee is looking at while selecting the scholarship candidates during the interview stage or before that stage?
During the interview?
Probably, like you mentioned that when students are already admitted, then you sit like as a committee together and you decide who will receive what kind of funding, kind of assistance.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say a few things about during the interview first. Scholarships, fellowships, and grants are really based on potential. Faculty are making decisions about who's someone who's potentially going to have a lot of promise and impact in the future. And so it's a judgment call. It's not a perfect science. And so some of the things we look at in making that decision is what you've done in the past. And so if we've seen that you have taken on certain kinds of projects or responsibilities and done them in a way that had impact and demonstrated even more potential to do other things at a higher level or in a grander way, that stands out as somebody who would be put in the pool to be considered for scholarships, grants, and fellowships. So what you've done in the past in terms of experiences matters. Test scores are looked at, but they're not given complete weight. We've had people get fellowships whose test scores were kind of average, but it's because of the other things they demonstrated that showed they had a lot of potential to really carry out things, follow through. I think that's mostly what's looked at. And so in the interview, we kind of look at how people present themselves, how they talk about the work they've done, and the impact that it's had. We also look for those same things in the application itself. So I hope that gives you some insight into what faculty are looking for.
Another question from a prospective PhD student. So like if she doesn't receive any kind of funding, will she be able to get work permission and work legally in the United States and kind of use that to cover her education? Or PhD students who get enrolled in the program automatically get the funding?
So the first question had to do with will I be able to work in the US? And I'm not a financial aid expert on that. So I would check with the programs you're interested in applying to and see what's possible. In other words, could you get a job somewhere outside the university or elsewhere in the university? That could be possible, but I don't know the details on that. The second part of the question, financial aid it's not an automatic in every institution. It's going to vary. Each institution will, if they accept you and they have financial resources, they're going to put together a package. And that package will include different things depending on the university. Sometimes it includes work as an assistant. Sometimes it includes a fellowship or scholarship. Sometimes it'll include a loan, depending on your situation. And sometimes it'll require family contribution or your contribution. So, the financial aid package could include some of those things. The program I work in, we guarantee 5 years of funding to everybody we admit. And so they don't have to think about other kinds of work that pays for their tuition, their cost of living, insurance, food, whatever it needs for those 5 years. If they go beyond those 5 years, then it's their responsibility to pick up the cost. But 5 years is enough to finish our program. And so you want to check each program you apply to and find out what could that financial package look like if you're accepted. And it's not going to be the same at each institution. Every institution has autonomy. It has its independence and it can do things the way it wants to. So you have to find that out.
Another good question about research. Do master students, like master applicants, need to show and have like research? Is it okay to show their undergraduate diploma project as a research?
Sure, yeah, I think that anything you do as an undergraduate that's research related is terrific. You want to be able to showcase that and play that up in your application. I've done research as an undergraduate. And so, if you are at a university that encourages undergrads to do research, thank the institution, thank the university, because that puts you in an advantaged position because you can talk about that. So I would definitely see that as a positive in your favor.
People just love your session, and we actually had one prospective undergraduate student who is thankful and who says that it really helped her, I believe. So another question, if I didn't publish the paper, can I still send it to the university to show it and talk about it, but it's not published yet?
Sure, yeah, that's fine. Most graduate programs will ask for a writing sample. They want to see a paper that you've written. And so this unpublished paper it sounds like it would be a good work to send as that writing sample. And you could mention in your application that if it's been submitted for review at a journal, let the committee know. This is my paper, you can read it, and it's been submitted to this journal for review, and you hope to have it published there. And again, I think that's a very positive thing that faculty looking at would say, this person is really seeing this as their calling, as the direction they want to go in life. And And that would make your application, a little more competitive.
Is it necessary to have an article published in a magazine with a high impact factor? Or my university scientific magazine is fine?
Well, it's going to vary depending on the field, but because a publication is not required to get into graduate school, I think that any publication is looked at pretty favorably. I wouldn't be concerned about impact factor. That's, I think, something that someone who's already a professor needs to pay attention to. But when you're thinking about just getting into graduate school, no one's expecting that you already publish. And if you have, that's the better for you. But we want to look at people who have potential for publishing. So that's why we want to see a writing sample. And if you have a really good one, that's to your credit.
This is amazing. Can assistant professors be graduate supervisors, mentors?
It depends on the university. I would say at most universities, they can be in the US. My first advisee, I was a brand new professor, my first year, was from Turkey. And he just showed up in my office and said, I need an advisor. And I'd never advised anybody before. And so I explained, I'm new. It's okay with my department chair. And if you'll be patient as I learn how to do this, I'll be glad to be your advisor. And it turned out to be terrific. Good partnership. And he was a really smart guy. And he's been a real success in his work in Turkey.
This is one of the questions that students often ask. Is it okay to apply to a master's degree or PhD after the graduation, or it's better to do during the senior year?
Okay, if you want to continue on right away after you graduate as an undergrad, it's better if you apply during your senior year. That way there'll be, because given when most of the deadlines are set, you can only apply at certain times of the year. And if you apply during your senior year, that will make for a continuous educational experience for you. Some fields require that you have some work experience. So in the field I'm in education, we want PhD students who have had at least 3 years of teaching in schools, working with kids. And so we want them to go out, experience, learn a lot on the job, and then they can think about being accepted into a PhD program in educational research. And there are other fields that want that, have some kind of similar experience. So there was another part to this question.
Yeah, is it okay to apply for a PhD after completing Bachelor's of Sciences, or it's better to do Master's first?
Yeah, this comes up sometimes. It's going to vary from university to university. Some PhD programs will accept you right out of a Bachelor's in Science program. Others want you to go into their Master's program first, and then if you want to continue into the PhD. So you have to check out each graduate program to find out what they want.
I think the next question is more to the financial department. Should we show our bank account statement during the application process? If yes, how much money should we have?
Okay, yeah. So if part of your support, your financial support, is coming from your own money or from your family, there is a step in the financial aid process where you have to show a bank statement. indicating how much money is put away for your education. As to how much money is needed, that it varies. It depends on how much the family or your personal contribution is expected to be. And you'll know that because you'll know that number by working with the financial aid person in the program and at the university you're accepted into. So you'll just have to wait till that time to find out what the dollar amount is that'll be needed.
Here's another question about the publication. If the paper was published in a different language, not English, can an applicant still talk about it? Do you recommend them to translate it to English, or to at least translate like a sample of it?
Yeah, oh, so let's say you published in Russian, and you definitely want to talk about this publication. And if the abstract is not in English, because some journals have abstracts in multiple languages. So if it's not in English, I would translate the abstract into English. And I think that would be sufficient. They just want to get an idea of what the article is about. And then you could submit the actual paper that's published. You could submit it as part of your application so they can see the actual document.
Okay, that's great. So they need to translate only short abstract, and that's it.
I think that would be, unless they ask for more, but for the application, that's all I would want to see is just what's this article about?
And a similar question, will the admissions committee read my undergraduate thesis, or they will only read short explanation, which I will present in my CV? I don't have any publications, and I want to mention my undergraduate thesis.
So I think Maya is asking this question. How long is her undergraduate thesis?
Maya, can you, we have so many questions. Maya, can you just tell us this? Maybe you can unmute yourself. Or just write it. Okay.
I graduated this year. My thesis is about 30-40 pages.
Okay, that's helpful information. Thank you, Maya. So given it's about 30 or 40 pages, that's something that you could put in your application, the whole thesis, so that if it's, it's in English, it could be read, and it's not too long. Many writing samples submitted are about that long, 30 to 40 pages, some a little longer. You also do want to mention it in your CV, just a short explanation there. And then maybe in your essay too, maybe just a sentence or two about it and how doing that thesis work, that kind of research really motivated you to want to know more. And that's why you're interested in graduate school in this particular program. I hope that's helpful, Maya.
Thank you.
We have a question. If I graduated from the university 20 years ago, never published any papers, but I have ideas for my future thesis, is there a chance to get accepted?
I think there is. We in the US, we cannot discriminate based on age. It's against the law to do that. And so for example, in the program I'm in, we have people who are they're young, they're in their late 20s. And then we have people who are more toward midlife. And each of them brings something unique to the program. Our goal when we sit down and we're going to admit 15 graduate students, our goal is to create a really nice mix of experiences of people who are from many places around the globe and would bring different ideas because of their experience. We can deliver a curriculum, but the curriculum really takes on a life of its own depending on what other people bring to it. And so we don't want everybody to be the same. We want a richness, a diversity. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the American university system is the diversity. There are just all kinds of different people, different ages. You know, my mother went back to college in midlife and she got her degree. She graduated when she was 40. And I was so proud of her when she did that. And she brought things to classes that really made the classes richer and better because she wasn't 18 or 20. You know, she had a life experience she could bring. So I would encourage you to find a program that looks like a good fit from where you are in life and see what can happen there.
What if a student worked with a team on diploma project and but she was responsible for the part that is not related to the program she's planning to apply?
I think that what you want to do is make a connection between the kinds of skills you did on that project, the kinds of skills you developed, and how those will transfer well to the program you want to go into. While the content might be different, there are underlying skills that are used and developed that might transfer well. And that's what you want to focus on. I'm a believer that many things we do have similar underlying skills, things that can transfer. And that those are the really important things to learn because our jobs will change on the surface, but it's the underlying things that we learn, the kind of deep structures, deep skills that will last a lifetime. And so if you can show those kinds of deep skills that you've developed and used and how they would work in the field you're going to study in, do that.
Yeah, this is great. So we have one question that relates to you. Are articles that are published in online scientific magazines are a good idea? And these online scientific magazines require publication fee. Are you familiar with this kind of publication?
Sure, I am. Yeah. Well, in general, this is a complicated question to ask. And here are a couple of the complications. The first is that some fields have a history of charging money to publish in their journals. And it's a long history. And I'll give you one example. I did a study here a few years ago. It was in the medical field. We were looking at health education, and we picked out a journal and we wanted to publish there, and we submitted, and they wrote back and said, "Where's your $2,000? And in the field I'm in, nobody charges any money to publish. It's all publications are all free. And so I'd never seen this before. And it turns out in many parts of medicine, there are publication fees. So depending on the field you want to go into, you have to understand, is this normal? Is this traditionally what's done? Or is this somebody just trying to make money on the side by creating their own magazine or journal? And so the second part of this is that there are increasingly people just trying to make money. And some of the journals aren't reputable. And so you have to do your homework and find out, is this a periodical that is legitimate, that's really doing a good service to the field and the profession or not? And so the bottom line is you got to do your homework and figure out, is this the right place to be paying some money to get something published?
But I think it's important for students to, you mentioned that you do not really look at the journal or impact factor, but you look more at like potential. So
Yeah.
this is probably a good thing for students. So would you recommend to take TOEFL or IELTS for PhD? Is it necessary to take GRE for PhD in peace and conflict studies?
Okay, so the last part of that, for that particular area of study in peace and conflict studies, it's going to vary whether you should take a test like the GRE. It's going to vary from one university to another. So you have to check with each university. Everybody makes their own requirements. So you got to be a detective there. The first part of that question was about the language tests. To my knowledge, that unless you've studied in a US university prior or in an English-speaking country, say Australia, at an English-speaking university, you do need to take the tests. Just recently I saw where some universities are permitting the use of an app called Duolingo. And I think Duolingo has a little curriculum and then some tests you can take. And some universities are accepting that in place of TOEFL or other language tests. So again, you have to check with each program to find out.
Here's a great question. If a student graduated a long time ago, like 20 years ago, and that student doesn't have an opportunity to take a recommendation letter from any of professors, some of them like passed away or lost connection, what should they do?
Well, if you have a little bit of time, say you have a year's worth of time before you're going to actually submit, there are some things you can do that will help connect you with somebody who can talk about your academic potential. And one of them is to reach out to a program near you. Let's say you're in Kazakhstan and you reach out to a nearby university, and there are a couple faculty members who do research in the general area you're interested in. Ask if you could shadow one of them, or if you could be a volunteer helping with some of their own research or project, just in a small way. It doesn't have to be a full-blown project. And by volunteering to help or shadow or do whatever you can, you will develop someone who could possibly write a letter for you, a reference letter. And they could talk a little bit about your potential. This person seems really motivated. They're really curious. They have a good mind for thinking about data and analyzing things. They're able to follow through. So, those are some things you can do that will help you set yourself up to have good reviewers or good recommenders in your letters. But that takes some time. And so that's why I suggested earlier, the more time you have in advance of the deadline to get some things in place, that will advantage you and help you have a more competitive application.
I think we should, we have one question that I think will be interesting for you. And after that, maybe it's already time for us to finish our session. So this question is, I have a question about research topic I want to pursue in my academic career. It is too sophisticated and I don't have enough background knowledge to do research in that field. However, I did research in topics which are related, but not exactly this topic. So my question is, what would be better to apply for a program where I have experience in the research, or to the program where I don't have much experience, but this is my target topic? What will be where will I have higher chances?
Wow, I love that question. That's a great one. So, I'm just going to speak here just from out of my personal experience. I would really pursue your dream. What is it you really want to do? What's your mission? And I would make that the priority and use your prior experiences, even though they're a little different, use those to help say they have been stepping stones. They've been steps leading to what you really want to do. And it sounds like they're close enough topics, like they're not extremely different. They're close enough that a faculty member looking at it would say, I see what this person is doing. They're very carefully and sequentially sort of building and preparing themselves, and we can help them in our doctoral program or in our master's program. And we can help develop the knowledge and the skills. So I would really, my personal recommendation would be to pursue your dream, the thing you really want to do. If you want to also have a backup plan, you could apply to those other programs that are what you already know how to do. But I would make your dream the real priority. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, this was a good question. And we still have some questions coming. But I think that maybe because we're already 1 hour and 45 minutes. So I will share with you the presentation. We will have a recording uploaded to our YouTube channel, so everyone will have a chance to listen to this presentation one more time. And as I told you earlier, this is one of the most favorite topics. Thank you a lot for your time.
Thank you, Rashawn. And I just want to emphasize that the work you and your colleagues do is terrific. I was fortunate to be in Nur-Sultan about a year ago and talked to a group of students face-to-face at, I think it was Eurasian National University. They're at the Education USA Center there. And it was just so good to meet you. And thanks for all the hospitality that you and others showed. And one day I hope to be back in Kazakhstan. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.